Lord of the Mysteries audiobook by Kevin 830, one just inches away upon seeing Leonard. Klein's back muscles instantly stiffened. His nerves tensed up like a fully drawn bow that could snap at any moment. He remembered very clearly that Leonard had a marauder pathway angel, Pallas Zarost, parasitizing him. He could sense the uniqueness about his body and from that, see through his disguise. If that grandpa were to inform Leonard of the problem with the keeper in front of him, that would be troublesome. I'll just have to hope that my dear poet is afraid that his secret will be exposed, and that he would feign ignorance. Back in Tingen, although he often said that everyone has their secrets, and that there's no need to worry about it, that's all regarding matters pertaining to the church. Who knows if he suddenly feels the need to uphold justice and decides to be loyal and take the risk to expose me. After all, this matter is very similar with N.C. Zangwill's. At that moment, Klein's forehead nearly broke out into a sweat. To be frank, he never expected to encounter Leonard while heading to Channy's gate because he was a red glove and not an ordinary nighthawk. There was no need for him to be on duty, so there wasn't a need for him to be here at that moment in time. However, Klein immediately thought of a crucial point. The one who could detect his uniqueness was Pallas Zarost and not Leonard Mitchell. The former's attitude was more important. The grandpa knows that I know of his existence. Once he exposes my disguise and pushes me into a corner, he has to be prepared to be exposed by me. When the time comes, we will definitely be trading blows with each other, benefiting no one. And for an angel from the marauder pathway who doesn't believe in the goddess, there's no need for that. If I were him, I would pretend that nothing had happened. I wouldn't even remind Leonard Mitchell, leaving my safety to be decided by my host. As he quickly cleared his train of thought, Klein composed himself and walked over towards the red-gloved Leonard Mitchell. Leonard indifferently looked at the keeper with grizzled sparse hair. He couldn't help but raise his right hand to cover his mouth and yawn. He has nothing better to do because he doesn't sleep at night, so he'd gone to the duty room to play cards with the person on duty. What a perfect sleepless. Klein roughly understood the reason for the red-glove poet appearing. He recalled the reactions of the keepers when they met nighthawks in Tingen. He silently nodded his head at Leonard and drew a moon with his right index and middle finger, tapping his chest 4 times in a clockwise manner. Leonard used the same action in response as he passed by the keeper without noticing anything. Klein silently exhaled as he maintained his usual pace and gait until he reached his destination. The iron-black double door was heavy and cold. Engraved on it were 7 sacred emblems appearing as though nothing could stir it. Klein turned his body to the side and took 2 steps to the side. He knocked on the keeper's door, and under the gaze of the nighthawk on duty, he opened Channy's gate. The darkness deep inside immediately surged out. Even though there were silver candles with engraved patterns burning silently inside, they were unable to disperse such a feeling, and the ghostly blue flame accentuated the deathly silence. Meanwhile, Klein felt that something invisible in the darkness was grazing past his skin and entering deep into his body. It passed through the boundary of reality and illusions, connecting to Wraith Center. Suddenly, without even activating his spirit vision, he saw black threads covering the area behind Channy's gate. They were gently swaying, either bundled or extended out as though a lady was spreading out her hair, or some monster was flailing its tentacles. Klein walked forward with a deadpan expression. After entering the sealed land, he turned around and closed Channy's gate. At that moment, all the sounds outside were completely cut off. The silence inside was like a kingdom of the dead. It made him imagine and feel fear. Klein was reminded of himself occasionally watching the darkness in bed with his eyes open. He didn't dare to sleep even though he hadn't heard any ghost stories. It's no wonder the goddess has the title of Empress of Horror. Klein cast his gaze to the side and raised the lantern in the corner, lighting it with great familiarity. Dim yellow light immediately poured out before being tainted with a ghostly blue. Klein, who was wearing a black clergyman's robe, wasn't in a rush to head for basement 2 to search for the Antigonus family's notebook. Instead, he stayed behind the gate and patiently waited. He was doing so in the event that the Nighthawks were in urgent need of something but could only wait until daybreak since they were unable to retrieve them at night. Based on his experience, keepers were most easily disturbed in the first 5 minutes of them entering Channy's gate. As long as he survived that period, and as long as there weren't any additional accidents, the normal retrieval process of materials would happen after 8. That was the standard working hours of the Nighthawks and civilian staff. In other words, once Klein lasted the first 5 minutes, he wouldn't be disturbed by the Nighthawks for the next 2 hours. Of course, he didn't have that much time for his operation. The Church of Evernight opened at 8, and the servants would wake up an hour or an hour and a half ahead of time to get down to work. After 6:30, the other servants could realize that one of them was missing. Time ticked by as Klein's heartbeat couldn't help but speed up. He found the 5 minutes excruciating. Finally, his countdown ended as he cast his gaze towards the stone stairs in the darkness. It was the passage that led to the second floor. At that moment in time, there was no one in here that could restrict him. At this stage, Klein believed that he had overcome 70% of the difficulties. The remaining 30% consisted of how he would leave after obtaining the notebook. Of course, there was always a certain chance for all kinds of accidents to happen. Klein didn't wish to be careless as he raised a lantern and walked to the stone staircase. To other Beyonders, the first level behind Channy's gate was actually a lot more attractive than the sealed artifacts. There were all kinds of Beyonder ingredients, potion formulas, and secret knowledge here. There were even captured heretics that had been apprehended, as well as unaffiliated Beyonders. Be it trying to be rich, to advance, or to rescue their companions, an infiltrator just needed to search around this level. However, Klein needed to head deeper inside where the dangerous items were sealed. Passing through a few tightly locked stone chambers, he clearly sensed people inside. However, they weren't making a fuss or roaring, nor were they pleading for mercy or shouting for help. They were silently lying there or sitting there. Their auras had already turned cold. The lantern's light flickered as it illuminated the staircase that led down. Klein focused again and steadily walked deeper underground. He didn't run, afraid that he would trigger a negative reaction from the core seal. As it became darker, the ghostly blue flames from the elegant candle stands on the 2 ends had weakened. They appeared as though they were about to be extinguished at any moment. And at that moment, the pure darkness might bring about unimaginable horrific changes. Klein repressed his instinctive fear as he finally walked down the stairs and came to basement 2. With a wraith's night vision, Klein discovered that there were strange walls made of steel, bricks, mud, and silver. They were sectioned off into different regions, with certain spots open and other rooms tightly shut. All of them had a sealed artifact. With the lantern in hand, he turned left as the scene before Klein's eyes lit up. He saw a burning flame and a glowing red and black anthracite and charcoal. The region was in a half-open state. Inside was a bathtub-like object made of steel. The area beneath it was dug open and was stuffed with anthracite, charcoal, and other flammable objects. They kept burning, making the steel bathtub produce bubbling sounds, letting the steam emanate out, condensing on the ceiling and dripping down like rain. An artifact that needs to be soaked in hot water for the seal, and the keepers need to periodically add anthracite and charcoal to prevent the fire from extinguishing. If there's a sealed artifact that can constantly emit high temperatures, they can be placed together, Making the seal easy, Klein glanced at the steel bathtub. Hoping that no accident spoiled his plans, he approached it and used a tool to add some anthracite into the fire pit. When he looked up, he noticed something through the corner of his eye. Immersed under the hot water in the bathtub was a silver metallic object. Together, they seemed to form a heavy full-body armor, and a part of it had unremovable dark red blood stains and splattered red spots. 142, an ancient god's blood, so now it's permanently stored in the Backlund diocese. Klein had seen this sealed artifact before as the corresponding information surfaced in his mind. Just as he was about to retract his gaze, he saw the Spartan's silver helmet. The helmet's visor had been pulled down, making its interior appear dark. At that instant, Klein felt that a gaze was penetrating it and casting itself on him. He trembled as he hurriedly took 2 steps back, his heartbeat racing erratically. Not daring to observe it any further, Klein composed himself and cast his gaze forward as he steadily walked forward and left the area. After passing through a few sealed areas, his spiritual perception was triggered. He felt that something on the right was summoning him. Furthermore, it was producing the beating sounds of an expanding and contracting heart. Indeed, the Antigonus family's notebook has been waiting for me all this time. Klein silently confirmed his earlier theory, and following the illusory summoning, he changed direction and approached it. In just 2 or 3 minutes, he saw a room with an ajar stone door. It was dark inside without any source of light. With the lantern's illumination, an empty bookshelf formed from white bone appeared in Klein's eyes. On it was an ancient notebook in a black hardcover. It was the Antigonus family's notebook. Hornicis phlegrea, Hornicis phlegrea. Illusory voices drilled into Klein's ears as he confirmed his target. Things happened very smoothly, but Klein didn't dare to be careless or rash. He carefully entered the room as he slowly approached, afraid that the mechanism that sealed the Antigonus family's notebook would inflict harm to him. Hence, when he closed in, a hand in a dark red sleeve suddenly reached out from his abdomen. It was Wraith Senner's hand. One of the principles of a marionettist: use as a marionette as much as possible in situations that a marionette could be used. If anything were to happen, the marionette would bear the brunt. At this moment, there was a slam from the direction of the door as though someone had walked in. Klein's pupils dilated as he lunged for the bone shelf without any thought, making the marionette's hand by his abdomen grab the Antigonus family's notebook. At the same time, his right hand reached into his clothes and opened the iron cigar case and wore creeping hunger. He was attempting to teleport directly outside before the core seal reacted. During this process, a scene of the door naturally appeared in his mind. A figure wearing a hooded classical robe was standing there. The figure had a pretty face that wore a lifeless expression. The deep black eyes lacked any spirituality. That high-ranking member of the church that directly wiped Mr. A out of existence and ended the great smog of Backlund. Why would she be hiding underground? That's not logical. Just as a sense of horror emerged in Klein's heart, he instinctively lowered his head to look at his body. His body was rapidly being wiped away like an eraser erasing a pencil drawing. Before he could touch the Antigonus family's notebook, he had completely vanished. 832 town before his brain short-circuited. Klein only had time for 2 thoughts. How powerful. There's no way to resist. I wonder if I can be revived from such a death. As his thoughts resonated, Klein's vision turned pitch black. He lost all his senses as he entered a dreamless slumber. After an unknown period of time, the silent darkness suddenly stirred. He vaguely felt a sense of grogginess as he felt a cold wind blow at him. As his thoughts thawed bit by bit, Klein slowly opened his eyes and saw fog everywhere above him. The crimson moon was hidden in it, occasionally showing itself. Did I just resurrect again? Or have I entered the underworld? Even if it's the latter, that's not too problematic. I might even be able to get the skeleton messenger to contact Mr. Azek. However, I'll have to become an undead creature or spirit world creature. Klein's mind was still a little heavy, as though someone had injected glue into his brain, preventing him from expanding on his thoughts. Slowly, he sensed his body and heard his heart beating. His mind quickly turned lucid as he believed that the possibility of him resurrecting was higher. Perhaps he had been thrown out into the wilderness. Pa! Klein's joints produced a crack as he jumped to his feet. Without checking his physical condition, he first observed his surroundings and confirmed the type of environment he was in. The first thing he saw was a fog that permeated the area and the dark and stillness of the night, and Closeby was a tiny town. The most striking building in the town was an extremely ancient spired cathedral. It was completely black in color. There wasn't a bell tower, and at the top of it were pitch-black ravens spiraling around it. Around the cathedral were many buildings. They were normal two-story residences and simple wooden huts. There were bread shops with hanging signboards and grayish-white mills using water wheels for power. However, there wasn't a single pedestrian. They seemed to be asleep in the quietness of the night. As a seer, Klein instantly found the town very familiar, as though he had seen it somewhere in the past. After a brief recall, he remembered what it represented. This was the source of danger of the nighttime in the ruins of the Battle of Gods. After entering the easternmost region of the Sanya Sea, if one didn't sleep and enter a dream world when night fell, it would be discovered that the person would have gone missing once it was daytime. Klein had once been jolted awake in a dream with the Saint of Darkness, and he saw in the distance a place which was enshrouded in the tranquility of the night. There was a mysterious and bizarre foggy town. He even suspected that all the living beings that vanished at night in the ruins had entered the town. Now he was there himself. He was less than 100 meters from the foggy town. It's related to the night. The target vanishes like it was erased. The power of that high-ranking member of the church doesn't directly kill her enemies, and she instead sends them here. Do the living beings that vanish at night in the ruins also encounter such situations? But it's said that there's no way to obtain their whereabouts via divination. The only interpretation they can conclude is that they might still be alive. Of course, it's also possible that I can be resurrected. Thus, appearing here, amidst his thoughts, Klein retracted his gaze and used his ability as a clown to observe his physical condition. He had already changed back into Klein Moretti, but he was still wearing the keeper's black clergyman robe. He didn't have any signs of an injury on him. Filled with experience, Klein quickly calmed down. His right hand reached into his pocket and opened the iron cigar case. He took out the folded human-skinned glove and wore it on his left hand. After confirming that creeping hunger could still be used, Klein lifted Azek's copper whistle and blew into it. However, the skeleton messenger didn't appear in the spirit vision he quickly activated. Klein wasn't too surprised with such an outcome. Instead, he found it normal. After all, the people who had vanished on the eastern front of the Sanya Sea had yet to be found. After all, over the years, there was likely no lack of Beyonders here who could summon messengers, such as the members of the numinous episcopate. This place is directly isolated from the spirit world. From the looks of it, traveling can't be used, as expected of a high-ranking member the church sent to deal with the great smog of Backlund. She sends her targets here as a form of eternal exile or imprisonment. It's impossible to use ordinary or simple means to contact the outside world. To escape from this place, even saints will find it difficult. Klein didn't lose himself to anxiety as he still felt confident. He placed Azek's copper whistle back into the iron cigar case and prepared to take 4 steps counterclockwise. He wanted to head above the gray fog to escape the imprisonment of the fog town. Blessings stem from the immortal Lord of heaven and earth. Blessings stem from the sky Lord of heaven and earth. Blessings stem from the exalted theurge of heaven and earth. Blessings stem from the celestial worthy of heaven and earth. With one sentence per step, Klein rapidly completed the ritual. However, he didn't hear the familiar, frenzied ravings, nor did he see the endless, emanating grayish-white fog. Klein's pupils constricted as he fell into a momentarily daze. This place was isolated from the mysterious space above the gray fog. This made his greatest trump card unusable. Klein had relied on the area above the gray fog to escape danger many times in the past. But this time, this solution was ineffective. This was the first time he was encountering such a situation. "Man, it feels as though my cheat has been blocked," Klein lampooned to relax his tense emotions. Based on his knowledge of mysticism, he suspected that the foggy town was likely related to a true deity, because this was the only explanation as to why he couldn't head above the gray fog. "This place has close ties to the night. I was sent here after encountering a high-ranking member. Could it be a prison that the goddess created herself? But she is the mother of concealment. Perhaps she can directly make people or items enter a concealed state, making people in the real world never able to find them again." Klein seriously contemplated and decisively decided to explore the foggy town. This was because the method to leave this place was most likely to be there. At this point, he was no longer worried about not being able to convene the Tarot Club. Of course, there was no need for him to worry about it for now. He had canceled the coming tarot gathering ahead of time because the operation of stealing the Antigonus family's notebook was fraught with danger and variables. Klein suspected that he might end up dead and be unable to resurrect in time. Therefore, he used a reasonable excuse to get everyone to make additional preparations for a week. After making up his mind, Klein immediately got the wraith inside him to float beside him. The marionette's condition was already in a terrible state. The dead and cold aura was something substantial, making his control of the spirit-body threads somewhat rough. Thankfully, I can still use him for a few more days. Also, Mr. A was erased by that high-ranking church member. He might be living nearby. I have to be careful about this person who's equivalent to a lunatic. Klein transformed into Jam and Sparrow as he made Senner walk ahead and enter the foggy town. Following the marionettist principle he had concluded, he stood in the back with a distance of at least 110 meters between them. Over time, his digestion had increased his control over his marionette to 120 meters. There was also a reduction in the time needed to gain initial control of spirit-body threads and completely change someone into a marionette. Faced with an enemy whose spirit body was equally strong, the former took 16 seconds and the latter took 4 minutes. In the silent, foggy world, Senner, in his dark red coat and old triangular hat, didn't take long to enter the bizarre and mysterious town. Many of the building doors were still open, as though they were welcoming guests from afar. With his marionette's vision, Klein saw that there was a half-chewed loaf of white bread on the table. There were wine glasses for red wine and messy silver cutlery. It looked like someone had been enjoying dinner, but there was no one present. The owners of these different houses seemed to have suddenly vanished into thin air. Vanished. This term suddenly surfaced in Klein's mind as he hurriedly made Senner cast his gaze towards the grayish-white mill. Inside the mill, the wind-powered mill was rotating silently, but other than the floor that was scattered with flour, no flour came out again. This scene feels familiar. I seem to have heard of it before. Klein frowned bit by bit. As he relied on his marionette, he continued surveying his environment while carefully recalling the similar situation. Just as he was considering using dream divination to question his spirituality, he found the corresponding answer. A similar scene had appeared in the ancient ruins that appeared at the main peak of the Hornicis mountain range. Based on the literature, the buildings there had every arrangement and decoration well preserved. Even the wall murals didn't have any signs of damage. The table was arranged with cutlery, and there were dried stains of rot on the dining plates. In some rooms, there were half-filled bottles of alcohol that had almost turned into plain water. The discoverer mentioned that, when he first discovered the remains, he even had the belief that the people residing there had just vanished all of a sudden. There's some relation between this foggy town and the main peak of the Hornicis mountain range. No way after trying to avoid it I ended up coming to it. Klein's facial features twitched involuntarily. For a moment he couldn't believe what was on his mind. Of course, the scene was just similar and wasn't enough to make him come up with such a conclusion. After taking a deep breath and slowly exhaling, Klein forced himself to calm down. He controlled Wraith's center and made him venture deeper into the foggy town. At that moment, he heard light footsteps. Klein's heart tensed up as he hurriedly hid inside the mill and made his marionette stop. In just a few seconds, Wraith's center saw a woman walk out from a nearby alley. She wore a pure white robe and her hair was pulled back, revealing her long, white neck. She looked extremely beautiful. 833 things to take note of inside the dark, foggy town. The woman who walked out of the alley seemed to be out of place with her surroundings. She was pure, stately, and untainted. She was so gorgeous that it lit up the eyes of anyone whose gaze landed on her. As for her pure, simple robe and her loosely pulled back hair, they added to her bearing and languidness. That gorgeous woman also noticed Senner. Her expression froze for a moment before she smiled. Using a sweet voice, she said, "Senner, when did you become a marionette? If not for the powers of Evernight contaminating you this badly, I wouldn't have recognized you." Although she looked like she was talking to Senner, she was actually conversing with the controller through the marionette. This kind of dead and cold aura can't be hidden at all. I can't fool Beyonders of higher sequences. I was still hoping that I could hide somewhere inconspicuous and use Admiral of Blood Center to make contact with her so as to maximize my own safety. This place screens away the power of the gray fog, so if I were to die, I likely won't be able to resurrect. Klein hid inside the grayish-white mill and made his marionette speak hoarsely. "If you could leave, you'd easily find out that I've been serving my master more than a month ago." He used Admiral of Blood's tone and experiences to answer as though he was still alive. This was the acting principle of a marionettist, to let each marionette have their unique identity and setting. Meanwhile, Klein also buried a keyword "leave" in preparation to broach the topic of leaving. In this bizarre and mysterious town, he didn't have thoughts of instantly killing any demoness that he saw. Ignoring the question of there being any good demonesses, and whether he was equipped with the strength to do so, just the fact that they were trapped in here had made it imperative that he communicated with her for intelligence to seek a way to get out. This was enough to make him choose peaceful coexistence for the time being. The woman in a simple white robe chuckled and said, not forgetting to constantly act. "From the looks of it, you will quickly digest the Mariontis potion. A member of the secret order. She's very familiar with the seer pathway. The Demoness sect was a secret organization that was active in the Fourth Epoch. Even if they didn't have close ties with the Zaratol or Antigonus families, they should be quite familiar with each other. It's very normal to understand the seer pathway. Of course, the premise to that is that this lady is a demoness." Klein's heart stirred as he deliberately asked, "Aren't there other possibilities?" He tried to sound her out to see if other organizations might wield control over the seer pathway. The beautiful and pure lady walked forward and leaned towards Admiral of Blood Center as she said with a smile, "It doesn't matter which organization you belong to. We have been exiled here, and it's practically eternal imprisonment. The past no longer matters. What matters is the future, whether we can cooperate to find a way of leaving." I failed to sound her out. Klein made the Wraith reply, "That's exactly what I was thinking. How may I address you?" As the lady approached center, Klein caught a whiff of a refreshing fragrance with his marionette's sense of smell. Due to her words, he suddenly had a baffling thought to help each other in such a perilous situation while abandoning all morals, to help warm up each other's souls with their bodies. She's like a demoness, whom her voice sounds more familiar the more I listen to her. But why can't I put my thumb on it? What a pity. There's no way to use dream divination in such a situation. She will be able to seize the opportunity while I'm unconscious, and it's hard to predict what will happen. Klein frowned slightly. This beautiful woman with a tinge of languidness raised her hand to stroke her hair, accentuating her petite ear. Panatia, what about you? Klein had originally planned on randomly choosing a disguise, such as the Aurora Order's Mr. X or Death Announcer's second mate, Kirches. After all, he could use creeping hunger to simulate their powers, but he ultimately gave up the disguise and directly said, Jam and Sparrow. He didn't know when this suspected demoness had entered the foggy town, so he was unable to eliminate the possibility that she knew about Admiral of Blood's disappearance. Panatia nodded and asked, How did you get in? Klein didn't keep the truth from her as he said with the marionette's mouth, I encountered an unknown lady. She wore a hood and her eyes were like the night, but it lacked any spirituality. Panatia fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, So it's her. Heh. She didn't continue in detail as she said with a smile, What did you actually do? You actually managed to get the Church of Evernight to send her to deal with you. Panatia had changed the pronoun she used. Her. That lady is an angel, an ascetic from the church. Panatia seems to know much about her. Klein's thoughts whirred as he said vaguely, I infiltrated St. Samuel Cathedral and attempted to steal a sealed artifact, but in the end. He didn't go into the details because he had no idea how he encountered the lady. Klein believed that as an angel, it was impossible for the lady to keep living behind St. Samuel Cathedral's Channy's Gate. There was nothing in there that required an important figure like her to keep watch on the entire time. Is that so? So she is indeed in the basement of Samuel Cathedral. Panatia seemed to confirm something. In secret organizations, the word saint is not used when talking about St. Samuel Cathedral. I should take note of this detail in the future. Klein ruminated over her choice of words. Panatia didn't continue on the topic as she said with a smile, All right, let's not bother with the past. Just as I said, what's important is the future and how we can escape. Klein used this opportunity to make Center ask, What do you know about this place? Panatia glanced at the spired cathedral in the middle of the town and said, This place isn't the real or spirit world, nor is it the astral world. It's in some kind of secret, hidden state. I've explored most of this area, including the area outside the town. I didn't manage to find any clues. All that's left is that cathedral. Perhaps all the secrets are hidden inside. Why don't you explore the cathedral? Klein asked with his marionette's mouth. Panatia yanked her pure white robe. On it were signs of wear and tear. My intuition tells me that there's extreme danger inside. Upon saying that, she switched topics. And now there's a solution. Your marionette can help us scout. Even if it's lost, it wouldn't deal you any harm. Don't worry. As long as we gain an understanding of the situation inside, I'll find a chance to give you a better marionette. After all, it doesn't look like it can last long. There's nothing unreasonable about that, but I don't trust you. After all, you are most likely a demoness. Klein didn't agree or object to it as he took the opportunity to get Center to ask, Are there any things to take note of while in here? Panatia pursed her lips and said, Due to various reasons, a sizable number of people end up here, but they have all vanished. All vanished. Klein's heart palpitated as he asked, What happened? Panatia sighed and said, There are things I'm not sure about. Some entered those buildings and ate some of the food inside. Then they vanished instantly. And this time, the results of divination indicate that they've lost their lives and are undergoing eternal sleep. There will be erasure and vanishing events in this foggy town. Furthermore, they will no longer exist. Klein was horrified before he thought of another matter. He nearly blurted it out. "Won't you feel hungry?" Afraid that it would result in an anomaly, he forcefully held his tongue and made Senner ask her indirectly, "How long have you been in here?" As though sighing and laughing, Panatia said, "Perhaps it's been half a year. I've witnessed many people cannibalize others for sustenance. Thankfully, I don't need much and can live very long with a bit of food. And on a human's body, there is food that won't damage the body too significantly." As she spoke, she raised her hand and pointed at the crimson moon hanging behind the fog. Another thing to take note of is that once the crimson moon turns clear, there will be changes here. It will become extremely dangerous. I've been severely injured as a result. As she said that, she turned to point at a tear in her pure white robe. Klein subconsciously made Senner cast his gaze over, and he saw that at her collarbone underneath the tear, there was a deep wound that exposed her bone amidst fair, supple skin. At this moment, the skin transformed, producing dense patterns of mystery and colors of darkness and evil. Klein's mind seemed to explode as ravings and cries resounded in it. Meanwhile, his breathing became difficult as his body rapidly weakened. He couldn't help but collapse backward as he broke into a coughing fit. Then he saw the pure white robe and the two long female legs. Panatia. This lady had already entered the grayish-white mill, and as she watched the struggling jam and sparrow, she cracked the corners of her lips and revealed blood-colored tendrils in the gaps between her neat white teeth. She softly said, "Got you. 834 good luck, got you." Invisible threads emanated over as Panatia said that. They quickly wrapped around Jam and Sparrow as though she was binding him into a cocoon. At this moment, the figure in a black clergyman robe suddenly turned thin, transforming into a paper figurine covered in metal rust. Klein's figure appeared outside the grayish-white mill as he ran frantically towards the depths of the town. He was a person who had seen the eternal blazing sun's true body and lived. He had a certain level of resistance towards a spirit-body impact and the inclination of a loss of control brought about by a mythical creature form. Furthermore, Panatia wasn't a complete mythical creature. Therefore, even without the gray fog's help, Klein was able to recover from the racking headache. As he suppressed his body's mutation, he sensed that he had been inflicted with ailments. While collapsing, he used his violent coughing as a cover for him to use paper figurine substitutes. Paper figurines weren't mystical items, nor did they have any spirituality. Hence, Klein wasn't afraid that it would trigger a reaction from the core seal behind Channy's gate. Hence, he had brought quite a number with him. As Klein ran forward, he rubbed his right thumb and middle finger and lit up the flour piled inside the mill. Boom! The flour burst into flames as the mill was sent flying. The windmill outside collapsed to the ground as Panatia's figure crumbled bit by bit in the intense blast and scarlet flames as though she was a mirror. Almost at the same moment, her white-robed figure appeared behind Klein. Her loose, pulled-back hair instantly flared up and wildly extended in Klein's direction. Pa! As Klein snapped his fingers to ignite a tree leaf beside him, he controlled Senner to use mirror leap to appear in a window on a two-storied residence beside Panatia. Then, he attempted to make the terrifying woman's eyes reflect Senner's figure to complete the wraith possession. Scarlet flames suddenly leaped up and enveloped Klein's body, making him vanish from where he was as he appeared in a flame tens of meters away. As for Panatia's gem-like eyes, they seemed to hide mirrors that reflected figures wearing an old triangular hat and dark red coat. They overlapped one another and descended into chaos. Klein didn't hesitate to let Senner leave the window, transforming into a werewolf state to charge the demoness. Yes, Klein had already determined that Panatia was a demoness, and she was a demoness at the demigod level. The strands of black hair, as well as the invisible transparent threads, flared up, forming a ludicrous spiderweb that enveloped Senner, whose body was covered with thick, short hair. However, just as they made contact, Admiral of Blood's figure instantly phased away, causing the black hair and illusory demoness threads to pass through it. Without being able to touch him, it was obviously unable to bind him. He had taken his wraith form. Humph! Panatia's expression didn't change at all. All she did was produce a harumph. Suddenly, the thick hair strands and illusory threads that made contact with Senner burst into dark and silent black flames. They used spirituality as fuel, turning the wraith into a torch. Pa, pa, pa. Senner turned back into a werewolf from the burning as his limbs fell to the ground from the flame injuries. With that, a Sequence 5 wraith perished completely. And at this moment, Klein had repeatedly snapped his fingers, jumping into different columns of fire, and using his marionette sacrifice to escape deeper into the town. With a few flashes, he had pulled open a gap of hundreds of meters from Panatia. Suddenly, Klein felt his forehead burning hot. His lungs began to heave as he panted loudly and emitted heated air. As he had been hit by the impact of seeing an incomplete mythical creature's form, he had been a little too slow at using paper figurine substitutes. He had failed to swap out his ailment, and he had suffered some of the damage. Klein had originally imagined that he just needed to persist until he escaped Panatia's range of influence, but to his surprise, his condition was worsening faster than he expected. Furthermore, despite having opened up a gap of hundreds of meters, he didn't escape the signs of being infected. Thud! Just as he was about to continue using Flaming Jump, Klein's knees buckled as he collapsed to the ground without successfully snapping his fingers. Immediately, he heard Panatia's pleasant laughter in his ears. Even if you were to escape to the other side of town, there's no way to escape my ailments. You ought to know that back in Backlund, the entirety of East Borough was immersed in the plague fog I created. Apart from the most distant Empress Borough and West Borough, all the other areas were significantly affected as well. She's that Lady Despair who cooperated with Mr. A. She's one of the true murderers behind the great smog of Backlund. Klein felt his mind go adrift as he found himself become very sick while reeling in pain and despair. Although it still wasn't lethal, the irresistible coughs prevented him from using most of his Beyonder powers. Panatia walked over as her beautiful eyes were stained with an indescribable color of bloodthirst. It was like a tramp finally seeing a sizzling steak after starving for days. In her hands were what was left of Senner's torso and 2 broken limbs. This was apparently meant to be her stockpile of food. Your finger snap sounded good. I believe the taste of those 2 fingers should be pretty good. Panatia looked at Jam and Sparrow as he coughed in the distance, speaking with the tone of a raving lunatic. Just as she finished her sentence, she raised her hand and stuffed Senner's index finger into her mouth. She bit down on each segment, producing crushing sounds. Klein watched this scene with a blurred vision. In his grogginess, he felt his fingers also suffering such excruciating pain. At this moment, he knew that Lady Despair Panatia was already partially mad because she had eaten too much flesh from other Beyonders. Although with her knowledge of mysticism, she would have definitely waited for the Beyonder characteristics to seep out before partaking in her meal. The deceased had been trapped in here without any food, making them each other's targets. It was inevitable that they slowly lost their minds as they approached insanity. How could she remain fine eating such meat? Just as Klein was reeling in despair and wondering what method he could use to save himself, he saw the crimson moonlight suddenly turn bright. He saw Panatia's face colored with a look of horror. Without hesitation, she turned around and charged into a nearby building and slammed the door. As Klein felt his illness alleviate significantly, he hurriedly looked up into the sky. He saw that the crimson moonlight was already penetrating the fog, appearing clear as it illuminated the town. His heart stirred as he recalled what Panatia had previously said. He immediately struggled and hobbled into another building beside him without forgetting to lock the door. Once the crimson moon turns clear, there will be changes here. It will become extremely dangerous. 835. The figures coming and going after rushing into the building and closing the door. Klein realized that the curtains behind the windows were constantly in a drawn state. Only some faint crimson moonlight seeped in, lighting up the room slightly. He didn't bother making any additional observations as he found a wooden chair and sat down. He attempted to enter cogitation to calm his inclinations towards mutating. Since he had witnessed a saint-leveled Beyonder's incomplete mythical creature form, how could he survive it that easily? This wasn't the mysterious space above the gray fog that came with recovery effects. As Klein was able to withstand mental blows relatively well, he was able to straighten his thoughts out early and prevent himself from losing control, thus allowing him to successfully escape. However, this didn't mean that the problem had been resolved. He sat there, relying on cogitation and his control over his emotions to resist the waves of insane thoughts. During this process, he heard his cheekbones produce crunching sounds. He saw his black hair turn long and thick in an uncontrollable manner as his chest bulged through his clothes while his skin produced granules in the form of meat tendrils. After nearly 30 seconds, Klein finally exhaled and relaxed significantly. He had completely recovered from the effects that Panatia's incomplete mythical creature form brought. He even gained some new knowledge the level she was at had despair at its core, making her good at creating and spreading plagues. The insanity and mutation from witnessing a mythical creature not only produce the symptoms of losing control of one's pathway, but it also comes with the traits of the other party's sequence. Back then, I was nearly baked by the eternal blazing sun, and this time, I nearly became a demoness. Klein looked down at himself, restoring his skin, chest, and hair to normal. If he wasn't a faceless, aside from letting those meat tendrils sink into his body, he would have to rely on external forces to resolve the problem. Without the time to poignantly sigh or analyze the situation, Klein slowly stood up and cast his gaze towards the tightly drawn, dark-colored curtains as he attempted to figure out his current situation. His expression suddenly changed because he heard rowdy murmurs outside the street. At that instant, he felt that, apart from him and Lady Despair Panatia, the uninhabited town suddenly had many residents. They were loitering across the streets and alleys, greeting one another as they discussed whether to only buy bread or be extravagant and buy a pound of beef. The foggy town suddenly seemed to come to life. However, none of the figures entered the buildings that lined the streets. They seemed to keep coming and going across the street, producing voices that one would find difficult to believe to be conversations, as they sounded more like the deep growling of savage beasts. Klein couldn't imagine the scene outside. All he knew was that even a demigod-level demoness had to hide from the danger. He retracted his gaze and thought deeply for a few seconds, silently muttering, "I can't head out, but I can't stay in here either. Who knows when that crimson moon will be covered by fog again, allowing Panatia to regain her freedom of movement. When the time comes, with us being so close, there's no way for me to escape. But how do I move without heading out?" In his silence, Klein slowly turned his body and faced the pitch-black spired cathedral. According to Lady Despair Panatia, that cathedral was the only place she didn't dare explore. It was as though entering the cathedral was the only way to escape her hunt. Of course, a demoness like Panatia wasn't necessarily speaking the truth, but Klein believed that she wasn't likely to lie regarding such matters. After all, to her, He was her prey, her delicacy. Besides, Panatia back then was using her speech and charm to entice him bit by bit, designing a trap for him so as to capture her prey. With a demigod's confidence, it was unlikely she would reveal information as a bluff. In addition, at such times, speaking the truth was the safest and most reassuring option. There was no need to worry about the prey escaping ahead of time due to the detection of a lie. Unless her half-mad state causes her to habitually lie. Otherwise, it shouldn't be a problem. Klein, who was out of options, quickly made up his mind. He lowered his left hand and made creeping hunger turn transparent. Although he knew that traveling was useless, he still held out hope because this was the point when the crimson moon was at its clearest. There was no obstruction, and it was round like a silver plate. During such times, Mr. Door could transmit his shouts into the ears of his descendants from where he was lost. Traveling was enhanced, and anomalies happened, so it wasn't something impossible. Klein's figure rapidly phased away, but seconds later his body outline appeared again where he stood. I can't enter the spirit world, to the point of not even sensing it, as a beyonder power. Traveling only has a third of its uses. It can barely be used as invisibility, Klein muttered silently as he concluded his experiences and lessons. However, he was puzzled about one point. Traveling's phasing away and turning transparent is due to the unique traits of the spirit world, so why would it be effective? Klein pondered for about 10 seconds before he came to a rough idea. Every person must be connected to the spirit world because one's astral projection is located there. It can obtain all kinds of abstract information, which is the reason why revelations can be obtained from divination. Therefore, when we are converted into a hidden and secret state, our connection with the spirit world becomes part of it. This can explain why I can still use the unique traits of the spirit world, but am unable to enter it. This is because the former had a portion of it hidden away. I didn't have the time to consider it before and had attempted flaming jump. I was met with success, and this also requires the unique traits of the spirit world. After confirming this point, Klein raised his right hand and snapped his fingers, attempting to ignite a half-melted candle in the neighboring building. He wanted to use flaming jump to pass through the neighboring buildings and slowly approach the spired cathedral. Once the crimson moon was hidden by the fog, he would reassess the situation to decide if he would take the risk and hide inside. A scarlet flame was set ablaze in the neighboring building as it slowly expanded and illuminated the surroundings. At that moment, the streets outside suddenly turned abnormally silent. All of the beast-like growls disappeared. The figures that loitered on the streets seemed to turn to face the building, using their gazes in an attempt to penetrate the windows. Klein instantly broke out into a cold sweat. He didn't dare to leap over as he instinctively snapped his fingers and extinguished the flame. After a brief silence, the rowdy murmuring sounded again. The indistinct figures continued walking here and there. Only then did Klein heave a sigh of relief. He raised his hand to wipe the cold sweat from his forehead. He discovered that he had unknowingly made several mistakes after entering the foggy town. In such a dangerous and bizarre environment, he hadn't divined if he should light the candle in the neighboring building. My spiritual intuition should have warned me, but it didn't. From the looks of it, after the gray fog was screened away, my spiritual intuition and sense for danger are no longer enhanced. Now, I'm just a little stronger than a marionettist of the same level. I'm far from being crazy powerful. It's because of this that I was incited by Panatia's instigator powers to look at her wound. I didn't receive any premonition for danger, and subconsciously believed that it wouldn't be a problem with a marionette in between us. Klein temporarily didn't have time to have an after-action review of his previous battle. He placed his attention back onto approaching the cathedral without heading out. He began scrutinizing himself and his mystical items beyond her powers. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as he found a solution. This solution stemmed from a traveler's door opening which he thought was useless. This beyonder power was completely overshadowed by teleportation under normal circumstances, but in this mysterious and bizarre foggy town, just its usage of the unique traits of the spirit world became more useful. Klein wasn't in a rush to take action as he took out the gold coin which Senner used to reside in. Using divination to question his spirituality, he obtained the answer that he should penetrate the wall. And without any way to obtain a revelation from the spirit world, he could only choose to trust himself. He then walked to the wall that was shared with the neighboring building and pressed his hands on it. Silently, Klein passed through the stone wall and entered the next building. He followed the terrace houses until he arrived at the final one. According to his initial impressions of the town, he was already very close to the spired cathedral. He didn't need more than 2 flaming jumps to reach it. At that moment, the crimson moonlight that penetrated the dark-colored curtains didn't weaken. He could vaguely see figures coming and going like they were leading a normal life. Without being capable of moving further away, all Klein could do was sit down on a wooden chair that was a distance away from the windows. It was almost completely dark here with deep, dark shadows. Only at this point did he have the time to recall the details of his encounter with Demoness Panatia. She's actually the murderer that caused the great smog of Backlund. Tens of thousands of people died because of her. Even more people suffered the pain of losing their loved ones. Old Kohler, who worked hard to live, Ma'am Liz, who worked hard to raise her 2 daughters. Klein closed his eyes as he lifted his head and took deep breaths. He forced himself to extricate himself from the anger and hatred that suddenly surged in him as he calmly observed the turn of events. Unfortunately, I didn't let Senner wear that flower of blood. Otherwise, he should still be able to put up a struggle. However, there wasn't a choice. While possessing me, wearing a ring corresponding to a rose bishop while entering Channy's gate would be equivalent to blasting myself apart. Now, the only mystical item I can use is creeping hunger. There's zombie, baron of corruption, desire apostle, and traveler inside. Yes, I should try to see if I can contact the gray fog by praying while the crimson moon is clear. It doesn't work. I can now confirm that even with a marionette between us, I'll still be affected by a demoness's charm and incitement. Since Panatia can release a plague on a large scale, why didn't she attack me in secret in such a concealed manner? Instead, she waited until I nearly lost control from witnessing her incomplete mythical creature form and exposed my location before spreading the ailments. She can definitely do it. The great smog of Backlund is the best proof, though there are 2 explanations. First, it's because I was personally sent here by the angel. This made her place a great deal of attention on me, worried that spreading the plague in advance would be detected by my spirituality. Second, she's afraid of something, so she doesn't dare to blanket the area with her plague. If it's the latter, there are other dangers here. As Klein thought over the matter, he felt his spiritual perception trigger as a chill ran down his back. Almost at the same time, he saw that a deep shadow that blanketed him and the surroundings suddenly shrank, drilling towards his nostrils, mouth, and ears. 836 tossing food. At that moment, the shadow seemed to turn corporeal. It was ice cold and moist, and it instantly bound Klein within it like he was a mosquito in amber. Klein's figure was squashed and compressed as he regressed into a piece of paper, rapidly turning into mush. Paper figurine substitutes. Having sensed the danger ahead of time, he had made timely use of paper figurine substitutes. His black-robed figure appeared on the other end of the dining table as he opened his mouth, producing a bang sound. At this moment, Klein's mind suddenly turned adrift as he found his surroundings blurry and unclear. He instantly understood what was happening. He had been forcefully pulled into a dream. And with this, he determined one point: his abnormal ability of maintaining his lucidity and rationality in dreams had already solidified and become one with him. There was no need to use the gray fog to do so. After a brief struggle, Klein suddenly snapped awake and saw the shadows in the building slowly surging at him like a tidal wave. Bang! He opened his mouth and produced an extremely mighty air bullet. This bullet struck the shadow, producing a huge swath of white. The shadows around the whiteness immediately receded and filled it to the brim, returning everything to normal once again. Klein took this opportunity to roll to the side and turned his left glove pale with a tinge of dark green. With a clap, the spot he stood at was smashed by a lump of flesh and blood that flew out from the shadow, covering the dark red carpet that was covered with strange mold. In an unobvious manner, Klein had a feeling that he was being weakened. Without any time to think deeper into the matter, he immediately made his feet produce an icy layer that emanated cold air. White frost crept up and rapidly froze the shadow. Underneath the crystalline frost was a squirming and warping pitch blackness, like oil that had its own life. Zombie's ice stun. Klein did another flip and changed his position while making his glove produce black granules that were profound and dark. Right on the heels of that, he straightened his body, and facing the shadow beneath the layer of ice, he said a word filled with foulness, a word that came from the devil language: slow. Suddenly, Klein saw the shadows squirming slow down. Clearly, it was in an extremely sluggish state. However, his thoughts had also turned sluggish, preventing him from dealing any follow-up attacks. His language of foulness had been distorted, and although it was clearly directed at the shadow, it had been distorted to target the entire living room, hence affecting himself. In just seconds, Klein extricated himself from the slowed state, and without any thought, he lunged for the dining table, picking up a plate with half a piece of steak and throwing it at the shadow. During this process, his left glove remained dark black, but it had a sinister and noble vibe. Bribe. He had used the steak to bribe the enemy, weakening the other party's offensive, defensive, and controlling abilities. At this moment, the figure suddenly shrank back into the corner of the wall, allowing the dining plate to smash and shatter into the melting ice. Then, the figure surged upwards, taking the form of a pitch-black figure with a hooded robe. In the palm of the figure, a transparent and blurry book appeared in front of him. It was accompanied by a distant and indistinct chant. I came, I saw, I record. Just as the chanting sounded, the book rapidly flipped through the pages and produced a burning white spear. Mr. A, has he gone completely mad? He dares to use fire-related Beyonder powers in such an environment. Klein's heart tightened as his thoughts raced. He hurriedly rushed towards his opponent and held his left hand behind him. Creeping hunger was quickly tainted with the dark colors of corruption before condensing a ridiculous great sword that seemed to be combined from scarlet magma and blue-hot flames. Thump! Klein's footsteps were heavy as he bent his back, pulling his shoulder back as he forcefully delivered a strike with his left arm. The muscles on his arm bulged as he swung the sword of lava. The resplendent great sword cleaved down on the fiery spear, sending sparks of white, blue, and red scattering in every direction as they ignited the chairs and curtains. The murmurs outside the street had long vanished. All the indistinct figures had turned over and there was extreme silence. After shattering the fiery spear with a cleave, Klein bent his knee and genuflected, snapping his fingers with his right hand. Pa! The flames in the entire room were extinguished. Klein didn't move any further. He had a nagging feeling that a dense array of gazes were trying to see through the curtains to seek out any abnormalities. The hooded man formed of shadows didn't take any action as well. Although he was acting crazy just moments ago, he seemed to have sensed the inexplicable horror that was slowly approaching. In the dark room with tiny hints of crimson moonlight, Klein was genuflecting, while the other was standing close to the wall. It was as though the two of them had turned into stone statues. In the unbearable silence, time passed by abnormally slowly. All Klein did was count 10 seconds, and it felt like an hour had passed. Finally, the beast-like growls sounded once again in a staccato, disjointed manner, and the indistinct figures outside began walking again, returning back to the streets. Almost at the same time, Klein obtained initial control of his target's spirit-body threads. The hooded man's actions of pouncing forward instantly turned sluggish. Without any hesitation, Klein bent his body and circled the area, preparing to take advantage of his opponent's delay to disrupt any of his subsequent counterattacks and slowly turn him into a marionette. At this moment, his nose suddenly felt an itch as he couldn't help but open his mouth. Achoo! Klein sneezed and lost his control over the spirit-body threads. Furthermore, his throat began to hurt as mucus began to take form. He had caught a cold. He actually caught a cold in the intense battle. After suspecting that his opponent was Mr. A, Klein had actually been wary against a demoness's ailment based on his past experience when fighting Mr. A. He had been placed at a significant disadvantage back then. But in a battle that didn't give him time to think, he had made a mistake. His constitution had long weakened due to the plague from the actual demoness, Panatia. He had no way to wait until the marionette conversion completed. He didn't even have a chance of obtaining a deeper level of initial control and use air bullets to deal a lethal strike. Achoo! As Klein sneezed, he rolled away. Meanwhile, he switched creeping hunger to the Baron of Corruption state and attempted to use his distortion powers to reduce the effects of his cold. Of course, thanks to his bribe from before, his condition wasn't too serious. All it did was affect his control over the spirit-body threads and not make him incapable of fighting. While rolling away, Klein noticed from the corner of his eye that his opponent was leaving his shadowy state. The hood slipped backward, revealing a face that looked beautiful like a female. It was none other than Mr. A. This Aurora Order Oracle had actually managed to survive this long despite the harsh environment. However, his eyes were already bloodshot. He looked at Klein as though he was looking at a delightful delicacy. The hunger that was innate and instinctive wasn't concealed at all. At that moment, Klein's mood didn't wane because he still had sufficient strength to do battle. What he was most worried about wasn't Mr. A, but that their escalating battle would produce flames and attract the danger outside. When that happens, there was no way the two of them could escape death. Hunger. The immense hunger has made Mr. A lose his rationality and no longer care about the loitering figures. If I can slightly alleviate his hunger, he should stop attacking and patiently wait until the crimson moon is once again hidden by the fog and give him some food. As his thoughts raced, Klein nearly sliced off a piece of his flesh to throw at Mr. A. Thankfully, he thought of something in the nick of time. He had food on him. They were the dried mushrooms that Frank Lee had produced. It was said to be a crossbreed between beef and the flesh of a rose bishop. As long as there was fish and water, it could keep reproducing. As this was a new species in a subtle sense, making it not directly related to a rose bishop, Klein had placed it with herbal powders he often used like slumber flower, without removing them. He wasn't afraid that it would trigger any anomalies within the core seal behind Channy's gate. Achoo! With another sneeze and another roll, Klein had taken out the dried mushroom and thrown it at Mr. A. Perhaps the smell of beef had attracted him. Or perhaps it was the mutual sense shared between rose bishops. Mr. A immediately stopped attempting to flip through his illusory book. As he caught the mushroom, he stuffed it into his mouth, chewed, and swallowed it. The hunger pangs that were written in his eyes gradually lessened, but the way he looked at Klein remained the same. Klein threw the remaining dried mushrooms at Mr. A, who caught them. Without any hesitation, he cleanly ate them. His vision finally turned for the better. Glancing at the indistinct figures loitering outside the windows, he stepped back into a corner, fusing into the shadows. Phew! Klein heaved a sigh of relief and retreated to another corner of the wall. Mr. A actually isn't dead. I have to say that in such an environment, a Rose Bishop's abilities can provide immense help. Just using the stored flesh and eating himself can make him last quite long, of course. The fact that Mr. A hasn't been killed by Lady Despair Panatia implies his strength. However, the demigod-level powers he recorded must have been used up as Klein thought. He deliberated over his words, wishing to sound out Mr. A for more information. "Have you found any clues on how to leave?" There was silence as Mr. A didn't give an answer. His insanity has made it impossible to talk to him. Klein pondered for 2 seconds and said a name, Leomaster. This was the name of the Aurora Order's Saint of Darkness who had dissociated personalities. After a brief silence, Mr. A's slightly hoarse voice sounded again. "He has been sent in here as well." Indeed, only matters regarding the Aurora Order elicits a response. Klein frankly said, "No, he is trapped inside the ruins of the Battle of Gods." Without waiting for Mr. A to say a word, he continued, "Why don't you enter the cathedral?" Mr. A said in a muddled manner, "It's very dangerous, very, very dangerous. It's also dangerous outside. All the dangers stem from there. All the people who vanished would reappear during the crimson moon." Before he could finish his sentence, the tiny bit of crimson moonlight that passed through the curtains suddenly turned extremely dim. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com. 837 The Hangers. As the crimson moonlight dimmed, a thought surfaced in Klein's mind. The crimson moon is about to be covered by fog again. Just as this thought appeared, the indistinct, loitering figures outside vanished as though they had evaporated into thin air. The beast-like growls also came to a halt. The environment has been restored to its previous state. Demoness of Despair Panatia can move about freely again. Mr. A will no longer have any qualms about the danger outside. He can unleash a barrage of attacks to capture his prey. Klein instantly came to a conclusion as he raised his right index finger and snapped, igniting the leaves of a tree tens of meters away. He wanted to open up a gap with Mr. A to prevent himself from getting sicker. At the same time, he wanted to determine if he should take the risk of entering the ancient cathedral. With respect to his present situation, Klein already had a plan in mind. It was to use Mr. A's potent and multifarious abilities to draw Panatia's attention. After all, to her, a shepherd and a marionettist weren't any different when it came to meat quality. They could both fill her stomach, so her priority was definitely on who was easier to deal with. When the time comes, both parties would definitely engage in a battle, and Klein needed to find an opportunity to strike down Panatia. Just as the scarlet flame soared and engulfed Klein, he saw Mr. A turn into a shadow and meld into the surroundings once again. It was unknown where he hid himself. He ran. "Aren't you the crazy Mr. A? Shouldn't you continue pursuing your prey? Why did you run?" Klein's gaze froze as he couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth. His figure vanished amidst the flames before appearing in flames tens of meters away. Just as Klein leaped out of the fire, he felt his forehead burning once again. His lungs felt heavy as his breathing became rapid and difficult. Plague. Demoness of Despair Panatia had spread her plague once again. To Klein, this beautiful lady in a pure white robe had already floated somewhere in midair at some point in time, walking towards him. Beneath her feet were countless transparent and thin lines that formed a spider's web. They were connected to the surrounding buildings and trees, fully covering half the street. In the eyes of this demigod-level demoness, the intense hunger pangs were gone. The obvious bloodshot look in her eyes wasn't there, and the way she looked at Jam and Sparrow was one of insanity and teasing. It was as though she wanted to drain his ability to resist, bit by bit, making him feel the deepest, most heavy, and most painful despair. Klein held back his urge to cough as he snapped his fingers again, causing the tree beside the cathedral to burst into flames. His figure was immediately engulfed by the fire as he rapidly faded away and appeared above the tree. He had appeared amidst the gorgeous flames. Right on the heels of that, Klein hurriedly jumped to the ground, somersaulting to the side of the ancient cathedral. At this moment, his body suddenly turned cold as he found that his feet, thighs, and waist were covered in thick layers of ice. And surrounding him was an accumulation of frost as the temperature declined rapidly. Klein clenched his teeth, holding back the horror within him. He followed his plan, and he reached out his arms in an abnormally rigid fashion, pressing it straight onto the wall. The creeping hunger on his left hand turned transparent. In silence, Klein passed through the thick, pitch-black wall and entered the spired cathedral. The spot where he was standing had a black fireball smash into the wall, just a little too slow. It splashed out like water, burning away the nearby frost and weeds. At this moment, at the top of the ancient cathedral's spire, swirling ravens opened their beaks. Wah! 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 Panatia halted as she looked at the dark cathedral. Bit by bit, her face was dyed with a look of fear. Inside the cathedral, Klein found himself unable to see anything as it was darker than the outside. As the frost melted, and with him getting accustomed to the dim lights, he finally saw the scene before him. As far as he could see, there were figures being hung up in midair. They were all humans. Some of them were dressed in black classical robes, others in brown jackets. Some were wearing very fluffy skirts, while others had tattered clothes, making them resemble beggars. Some of them had boorish looks, others handsome with cut facial features. Some of them were beautiful, others tender, adorable, and looking youthful. None of them looked the same. No, there was something that they had in common. They were like meat that was undergoing a curing process. They hung from above, swaying gently as their heads were bowed and their eyes rolled back. Klein felt his scalp tingle as he no longer doubted that this place was extremely dangerous as described by Panatia and Mr. A. He held his back to the wall, planning on using door opening to leave to avoid danger the moment anything happened. He would then pass through the wall if he was discovered by the demoness of despair to avoid her attacks. By repeatedly doing so, he could ensure his safety. Whoosh! A cold air blew through the cathedral as the figures and corpses turned around, facing Klein. Their collars were like ropes that left their heads drooping. Klein nearly drew a gasp as he pressed his left palm onto the wall. At this moment, the figures began to sway like wind chimes. They opened their eyes and produced raving-like voices. Hornicis phlegria, Hornicis phlegria, Hornicis phlegria. The voices resounded into one, drilling into Klein's ears as he found it abnormally familiar. This was the raving that he had heard during his advancements in the past. It actually originated from here, from the foggy town. It came from the corpses that hung high in this ancient cathedral. At that instant, not only was Klein's scalp tingling, he even felt his body trembling. Could it be that this foggy town actually originates from the main peak of the Hornicis mountain range? That nation of the Evernight which vanished. Don't tell me that I really am on the mountain. However, why would it be inside this cathedral? These same ravings don't bring about a headache or push me towards losing control. Klein hissed as he spread his hands and clenched it again repeatedly, resisting the urge to pass through the wall. Since he was already inside and had seen the source of the ravings, he believed that escaping probably didn't resolve any problems. Regardless, it's necessary to do a simple search. Otherwise, I wouldn't even know the reason when something abnormal happens to me. After using a gold coin to quickly do a divination, Klein tapped his molars gently and activated his spirit vision. He looked up at the hanging figures and found their spirituality converged. The aura colors looked normal, but they exuded a stiff appearance. There are aura colors. They aren't dead yet. Klein frowned slightly and deactivated his spirit vision. Right on the heels of that, he tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger, planning to observe the spirit-body threads. Upon sweeping his gaze across, Klein's pupils dilated because the spirit-body threads of the swaying figures looked extremely special. The illusory black threads that corresponded to their bodies were extended in the same direction the peak of the ancient cathedral. There wasn't a single exception. In Klein's vision, they were like corpses being hung up by their spirit-body threads. Before Klein could figure out what all of this meant, he caught a scene from the corner of his eye. His spirit-body threads were automatically reaching upwards to the peak of the cathedral, to the source that hung up those figures. This was the first time Klein saw spirit-body threads moving autonomously. It was as though they were metals that had come into contact with magnets. They floated upwards uncontrollably, and the fastest thread had already reached its destination. Klein didn't dare imagine the outcome if all his spirit-body threads gathered up above. He suspected that he too would become a piece of cured meat that would be hung up to be dehydrated, producing the ravings of Hornisus phlegrea along with the wind. For most Beyonders, they could only consider leaving the cathedral in a bid to sever the process of having their spirit-body threads attracted, but Klein was different. He was a marionettist. Quickly, he controlled his spirit-body threads and pulled them thread by thread. After nearly 30 seconds, Klein finally completed this task. However, his spirit-body threads continued floating upwards. He had to constantly pay attention and resist this upward drift. This is one of the dangers lurking inside the cathedral. Klein slowly drew a breath as he no longer leaned close to the walls. Step by step, he ventured deep into the cathedral. Above him, the figures swayed as though they were watching him. After proceeding nearly 30 meters, Klein finally saw something different. It was the pitch-black altar of the cathedral. On the altar was a stone statue. Klein identified the statue when he took a few more steps. It was in the shape of a female human. However, her hips and ribs had two beast legs growing out from each one of them. These limbs were covered in short, thick, and firm black fur. In addition, the statue was surrounded with black bands that seemed to reach out like tentacles. At the statue's feet, there were souls sleeping as though they were holding her up on a pedestal. Klein shifted his gaze and looked at the statue's head and saw a beautiful face. Klein's gaze froze. That face wasn't unfamiliar to him, because he had been sent in here by that entity. This stone statue's appearance was identical to the eraser angel under St. Samuel Cathedral. She is actually related to this place, that's right. The people she erased are sent here, so it would be odd if she's not connected to this place. What's the connection between her and the fourth epic's nation of the Evernight on the Hornisus mountain range? That mother of the sky. But if that's the case, why would she be working for the church? Furthermore, such an image does have its resemblance to the demonic wolf that little son mentioned. Many thoughts instantly surfaced in Klein's mind. During this process, he slowly shifted his gaze away in another direction, in the hopes of finding any possible clues. A few seconds later, Klein discovered a figure. It wasn't hung in midair but was seated diagonally behind the statue. 838 Scene from the historical void. The figure sitting diagonally behind the statue was an elder in a black robe. He wore a hood, and his head was bowed with his eyes closed. By his mouth was a thick, long, and white beard. It was as though he hadn't had it trimmed for years, preventing anyone from telling what he originally looked like. And in Klein's eyes, this hoary elder was even more bizarre than the figures hanging in midair. After his spirit-body threads extended out from his body, it didn't drift up to the spot which seemed to hide magnets. Instead, they coiled around his body and back on themselves, making the source and destination one and the same. Ordinary spirit body threads stemmed from inside a spirit body, extended outwards in different directions into infinity. As for the figures that hung from above, the sources of their spirit body threads was no different. The destination which they extended out to was gathered at the top of the cathedral. Thus, it was obvious that there was something wrong about it. This is the reason why he hasn't been hung up. Or should I say, this is how he avoids the danger inside the cathedral. As Klein controlled his spirit body threads to resist the continuous upward drift, he silently muttered and guessed at the reason. Suddenly, he saw a pair of pitch-black eyes that looked like an unlit water surface. The elder sitting behind the statue opened his eyes. He was still alive. Klein subconsciously took a step back as he bent his back slightly, holding out his left palm in front of him. Amidst indescribable silence and anxiety, he saw the hoary elder's eyes move slightly, open his mouth slightly, and speak in a muffled manner. Finally, another seer has come here. Another. Beyonders from the seer pathway have entered this cathedral. That's right, apart from eraser angels erasing of people, sending them to this foggy town, and those who vanished in the night at the Battle of God ruins would also appear here. Amongst them, there might be a few seer pathway beyonders who attempted to seek out mermaids in those waters, or had successfully advanced and were looking to leave. Seeing that the other party had no intention of immediately attacking him and had the intention to converse with him, he forcefully composed himself and said after some thought, "Why do you say that?" The hooded elder with black eyes and white beard didn't immediately reply as he asked with a muffled voice, "Do you wish to escape? I can tell you how." Klein wasn't moved as he immediately asked, "Then why are you still here?" Since the method to escaping this foggy town was known, why would one stay inside such a dangerous cathedral? The elder drooped his head and chuckled in a throaty manner. "It's because I've died long ago." The hair on Klein's back stood on end as he broke out into a cold sweat. He was speechless. He could tell that the elder wasn't in existence in the form of a soul. Seeing no response, the elder slowly lifted his head and swept his glance at Klein in his jam and sparrow appearance. "I've used special Beyonder powers to seek out the void in this world's history and fate. I sliced off a portion of my projection and left it here. It has been maintained to this day. As for my body and my spirit, they have long died and dissipated." This is such a fascinating power. Klein was unable to verify the claim, so all he could do was ask, "Then why are you giving guidance on how to escape to seers who enter?" The elder's voice remained muffled. "After you open the door, the history and fate in here will experience a change. The projection I sliced will also vanish, and when the time comes, you will see an urn of ashes. I only wish that they could be scattered in the Esrenzo River near Inti's capital, Trier. That is my hometown, the place where I was born. Do you know the place I'm referring to? I've no idea how much time has passed in the real world." "He's been imprisoned for at least a century," Klein frankly replied. "They still exist." "Excellent," the elder said with a nod, his throat apparently filled with phlegm. Although Klein didn't fully trust the person before him, he believed that knowing more made it beneficial for him to make a judgment. Hence, he decided not to waste any time for fear of being interrupted again. "Then how should I escape?" The elder remained sitting in his spot and said without any obvious movement, "See that wall behind the statue? Do you see an inset?" Klein actually didn't wish to follow his instructions. After all, he had been led by Panatia to do so, resulting in him seeing her incomplete mythical creature form, and hence suffered from shock and damage. However, he had previously planned on surveying the surroundings in search of clues. Therefore, he ultimately carefully shifted his gaze to look at the wall behind the statue. Engraved on it were short and ancient symbols, but there was an empty spot in the middle, preventing it from being connected as one. The blank area was the size of 2 palms and was obviously indented. It was as though someone had dug away a brick on its surface. As long as you find the corresponding obsidian rock and insert it, this wall will tentatively be released from a concealed and secret state. It will showcase illusory colors. When the time comes, I'll tell you of a complicated special symbol. It will be the key to opening the door on the wall, allowing you to escape. The elder didn't turn his head as he looked straight ahead and spoke in detail. A complicated special symbol, a key to opening the door. Klein listened to the ravings of Hornisus Phlegrea resound with the wind behind him as a symbol suddenly came to mind. It was the vertical eye formed from many secret symbols. It was the information that the Antigonus family's notebook had passed to him by corrupting the misfortune cloth puppet, and the Antigonus family appeared to have a deep connection with the nation of the Evernight on the main peak of the Hornisus mountain range. Could this be the so-called key? Klein retracted his gaze in a calm manner as he asked, "Why did all the seers from before fail?" The elder chuckled and said, "Some of them are as naggy as you are, failing to leave this cathedral before the crimson moon turned clear. They ended up being hung up. It's the case for that fellow who gave himself a handsome face. Likewise for the lady with flawless features." Klein was nearly rendered speechless by the elder's jibe. However, he also learned something. The danger inside the cathedral would greatly increase once the crimson moon turned clear. Even Mariontists were unable to control their spirit-body threads. I'll have to constantly take note of the changes in light. Once the crimson moon turns clear, I'll pass through the wall. Klein looked around him and confirmed that the wall closest to the pitch-black altar was 6 to 7 meters away. Then, he quickly came up with an emergency plan. The hooded elder didn't look at him as he continued. The rest weren't very lucky. They encountered enemies that had lost their reasoning and only wanted them for food. They were then devoured. You have to know that there aren't many Beyonders from the seer pathway to begin with. The ones that can become Mariontists are even fewer. The number that can come in here due to various reasons are only a handful. Of course, there are a lot more that were attracted and enticed in here, but it was difficult for them to come all the way here as they. He didn't finish his sentence as he slowly looked up and glanced at the top of the ancient cathedral. He then said with a muffled voice, "Their outcomes were equally tragic." "What do you mean?" "If I didn't attempt to steal the notebook, I would have to rely on the ravings from these hanging corpses inside this cathedral and climb up the main peak of the Hornisus mountain range to seek out the Antigonus family's treasure. Will I be considered as one of those that got attracted or enticed? It's difficult to come in here, and the outcome would be equally tragic." Klein's mind stirred as he began suspecting that the so-called treasure of the Antigonus family was nothing but a trap based on the dilapidated palace and translucent worms he had previously seen from his divinations. He didn't bother asking in more detail as he tried to sound out more important information. "Do you know where that obsidian rock is?" The elder chuckled. "It's in the hands of that demoness of despair." Demoness of despair. So Panatia really is a demoness of despair. Klein had previously addressed Panatia inwardly as such, but that was because he knew that she was called Lady Despair, as well as him being certain that she was a demoness. Hence, he had simplified the two tidbits of information and given her such a nickname. He never expected that the sequence 4 of the demoness pathway was Demoness of Despair. That will be very difficult for me to obtain that obsidian rock. She's a true demigod. Klein didn't conceal the difficult position he was placed in as he waited to see if the elder had any suggestions. The elder shook his head and said, "I'm a person who is long dead. There's very little help I can provide." Didn't you have a marionette when you came in?" "Yes, but it has already been eaten by the demoness of despair," Klein replied in a seemingly calm manner. The elder sighed and chuckled. "I can help you summon him from the history of this world." Just as he said that, Klein saw lines quickly outline themselves beside him, drawing out Admiral of Blood Center in his triangular hat and dark red coat. Furthermore, the spirit body threads were still under his control. Klein's pupils immediately constricted as he heard the hooded elder add, "It can only be maintained for 30 minutes. Make good use of the time. I'll help you strengthen some of the connections, enhancing your control of the marionette. This way, you can let the marionette use your Beyonder powers, and also allow you to swap locations with him instantaneously. Heh heh. The controllable distance and traits of him looking alive will also be boosted. Allow my marionette to use my Beyonder powers. Doesn't this mean that I can use the powers of a faceless to make my marionette turn into another me? A perfect body double. This is a demigod of the seer pathway. This is one of the powers of a bizarro sorcerer. The enemy never knows if the one killed is the real bizarro sorcerer. Also, summoning a marionette from history. This is completely inconceivable. Thoughts surfaced in Klein's mind as he could hardly compose himself. The elder looked up and glanced at him before continuing, "Give me a paper figurine." Klein frowned slightly and hesitated for a few seconds before taking out a paper figurine and handing it over. The elder reached out his wrinkled hand and took the paper figurine before swiping across it casually. Klein's headache, fever, and enlarged tonsils suddenly disappeared. The paper figurine was tainted with spots of red rust as it quickly cracked after becoming brittle. Using my paper figurine to transfer my ailment, Klein thought and finally asked, "Sorry for my breach of etiquette. How may I address you?" The elder didn't immediately reply as he said with a sigh, "I can only provide you a little help." He paused as he gave a muffled laugh. "You can call me, Zeratul, 839 descendant of an ancient god FCK. At that instant, Klein, who heard the elder's reply, had vulgarities resound in his mind. Apart from that, no other thoughts appeared. Zeratul, the leader of the secret order, a descendant of the fourth epic Solomon Empire aristocracy, the former owner of the Antigonus family's notebook, and the Beyonder guide for Emperor Roselle. He was a true high-sequence Beyonder of the seer pathway, a miracle invoker who was a secret existence about 2 centuries ago. He was believed by Arodes to have lost control, turning from an angel into a monster during his attempt to advance to Sequence 1, Attendant of Mysteries. No matter which description was used, he was a heavyweight that the present Klein was unable to resist. He had the feeling of shock that a figure from history textbooks had jumped out of it and walked in front of him, alive. He also felt the air around him appear to congeal as they piled on top of him, crushing his body and stifling his breathing. Klein had once imagined that perhaps all his encounters, including his transmigration, had stemmed from Zeratul's setup, and he suspected that he would be akin to the final boss he would encounter in games. And now, he had met him ahead of time. "I'm only a Sequence 5. Klein couldn't help but shout out inwardly as he suspected if the person opposite him was the real Zeratul. Zeratul is a last name. It represents an aristocratic family in the fourth epic Solomon Empire. In theory, there should be many Zeratuls over 2,000 years of history. Perhaps the one in Roselle's diary is the grandfather, father, brother, or son of that secret order's leader. Also, he mentioned that he has been dead for years, while Arodes and Will Ossipton have testified that the secret order's leader, Zeratul, is still alive. He has just lost control and turned into a monster, turning extremely crazy." Klein tried to convince himself that the situation might not be as terrible as he imagined. This quickly calmed him down as he began to carefully contemplate. The Beyonder powers that this Zeratul showcased doesn't seem like much, but all of them exceed the realm of normalcy. It's even more so for those that's related to history and fate. He's definitely not only a bizarro sorcerer. He might even be a Sequence 3 or Sequence 2. and this pathway's angels are few to begin with. This place is intricately tied with the nation of the Evernight which disappeared from the main peak of the Hornicis mountain range, and it produces the ravings that reach the ears of low and mid-sequence beyonders of the seer pathway. Back then, the secret order's leader, Zaratal, had fewer appearances after he obtained the Antigonus family's notebook via Emperor Roselle. It's unknown what he was plotting. Does this mean that I can believe he had come to the main peak of the Hornicis mountain range to seek out the treasure left behind by the Antigonus family based on the notebook, and obtain the corresponding potion formula and ingredients of sequence 1 attendant of mysteries? In the world of mysticism, repeated coincidences usually imply problems and a confirmation. If it is that Zaratal, could it be that splitting himself to store himself inside the foggy town is the reason that caused his ultimate loss of control? As for being long dead, there's an even more reasonable explanation. The secret order leader Zaratal had said so himself. What is a miracle? A miracle is to be resurrected from the dead, and he was already a miracle invoker. As Klein's mind churned, the hoary elder who claimed to be Zaratal chuckled. "From your reaction, you seem to know me," Klein quickly probed. "I've heard of this last name. I once met Queen Mystic and learned of the secret order from her, and also know of its leader." The elder nodded gently without giving any confirmation or denial. He smiled and vaguely asked, "What other help do you need?" "Help." Klein recalled the Beyonder powers he had showcased and said after some hesitation, "Are you able to summon a fish from the outside world from this concealed world's history? It's okay if it has already been turned into food." From his point of view, it wasn't an impossibility. After all, most people that entered the town had come from Sanya Sea's easternmost front, the ruins of the Battle of Gods. Perhaps some fish that had been reared there had been brought in. They could be used to be stored as food and also used to observe the changes in the environment. There could also be explorers who vanished from not being able to sleep in time when night came after eating their fill of fish. It wasn't unreasonable that fish meat could be found in the history of the foggy town. Zaratal raised his head and looked at Klein. He didn't immediately give him an answer. After a few seconds, he leveled his gaze and said indistinctly, "Yes." Just as he said that, a blob made up of ground fish meat appeared in Admiral of Blood Center's hands. "It can only be maintained for 45 minutes. Once it's over, it's as though one has never eaten it before," Zaratal added. That actually worked. Klein increasingly found the high-sequence Beyonder powers of the seer pathway to really be bizarre and terrifying. He had planned on saying that he didn't need any help, but considering how Zaratal was well known to be deceitful, with everything he said and did being questionable, he felt that he needed to make some preparations. Amidst his thoughts, Klein decided to appear a little greedy to lower Zaratal's appraisal of him, and believed that he could easily lead him to do his bidding. After letting his marionette put away the fish meat, his eyes rolled a little as he indiscernibly drew a breath and said, "I still need the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula." Zaratal didn't change his posture as he fell silent for a few seconds. He then said with a chuckle, "No problem, as long as you trust that I'll give you a real formula. After you return with the obsidian rock, I'll hand over both the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula and the symbol needed for opening the door to you. That isn't something that I need to care about. All that matters is that you scatter my ashes back into the river in my hometown." After Klein listened in silence, he couldn't help but ask, "You have a very high level. The ashes you leave behind will contaminate the river and create countless monsters." Zaratal laughed upon hearing that. "Very meticulous. However, there's nothing special about my ashes. I've lost them long ago." As he spoke, he looked up again and glanced at the peak of the ancient cathedral. He's hinting that his Beyonder characteristics and body's specialness had been absorbed by the magnet above. Klein pondered over Zaratul's meaning as he pressed on matters regarding his Beyonder pathway. What's the sequence 3 potion name after Bizarro sorcerer? Zaratul's beard moved slightly as he said, Scholar of Yore. Scholar of Yore. Although it sounds like a relic that's already dead and dug out from a tome, Zaratul has repeatedly mentioned history. The corresponding Beyonder powers are fascinating, Klein thought in glee as he asked again. Then what's the corresponding sequence 0? Zaratul lifted his head again and glanced at him. Finally, he chuckled and said, You will likely know when you open the door to escape. I hate people like you, saying things midway, often just smiling without giving an answer. Klein immediately understood the feeling Emperor Roselle once had as he turned his gaze to the statue beside him and asked, Who is this? Zaratul's head didn't turn as he said in a muffled manner, She is a descendant of an ancient god. A descendant of an ancient god. A descendant of annihilation demonic wolf Phlegrea. This ancient god seems to wield the authority of Evernight. His descendant established the nation of the Evernight. Before Klein could ask a question, he heard Zaratul chuckle and say, She also has a brother that you wouldn't be unfamiliar with. Who is it? Klein tried hard to recall who, but he couldn't find an answer. Zaratul chuckled. He gave himself a new last name. Antigonus. Antigonus, nation of the Evernight Hornisus Phlegrea. Klein's eyes lit up slightly as he pieced together the fragmented pieces of information. It's very easy to understand the Church of Evernight destroying the nation of the Evernight, as it's a battle of authorities. However, to completely eradicate the Antigonus family for having inherited the seer Beyonder paths of the divine doesn't make sense. There's no need to go that far. After all, the pathways that can be interchanged with the sleepless pathway are the death and giant pathways. Furthermore, Klein was still puzzled to this day. Why would the Antigonus family place their treasure on the main peak of the Hornisus mountain range? Why did they trust the people of the nation of the Evernight that much? Now he finally understood something. Just as Klein was about to ask more questions, he suddenly saw the crimson moonlight shining in from the cathedral's windows brighten. It drew out shadows of the corpses hanging in midair. The crimson moon has turned clear. Klein's heart tightened. Without any additional thoughts, he followed his emergency plans by raising his right hand. Snapping his fingers, he lit a candle by the wall that was a distance away from him. At the same time, he got center to possess him as he leaped out, somersaulting in the process before arriving at the wall closest to the outside. And this time, the entire cathedral had turned abnormally silent. There were no longer any resounding ravings. Klein's spiritual intuition didn't give him any indication of danger, but he could tell from the shadows on the ground that the corpses hanging in midair had turned towards the flame. Without any hesitation, Klein pressed his left palm down, passing through a wall and arriving outside the cathedral. Then, without even daring to even raise his head, he borrowed the driving force of a wraith to tumble and run towards the nearest building. The distance from wall to wall was only about 10 meters. During this process, he didn't hear the beast-like growls nor detect the loitering figures. However, his back felt like it was being pierced by a sea of glares. In just a second, Klein had appeared outside the building. Pressing down with his palms, he passed through the wall. Then, he snapped his fingers and remotely used flame controlling to ignite a candle inside the cathedral. After a brief moment of silence and anxiety, the feeling of being stared at vanished. Beyond the tightly drawn curtains, figures began to appear as they began loitering. 840, using his advantage with all the abnormalities vanishing, Klein heaved a slight sigh of relief. He began to observe his surroundings. Then, he selected a shadowy spot that wasn't too dark due to the faint moonlight. This was to prevent himself from suffering any sudden attacks, and the few seconds from before had made him come up with a theory about the faint figures and beast-like growls. They were previously corpses that were hung inside the cathedral, producing the ravings of Hornicis Phlegrea. When Klein passed through the wall and left the cathedral, the corpses that hung from above had turned to face the lit candle, and there weren't any figures on the street until Klein remotely used flame controlling and extinguished the flame. Everything was the same as before. When the crimson moon is clear and one's spirituality is enhanced, the magnet at the top of the cathedral will have a stronger influence on the foggy town. It will be able to control those corpses to loiter around and pretend that everything is normal. If that really is the case, the light might actually be attracting the controller's attention. Under such circumstances, if the flame isn't extinguished and the source is locked on, it might result in an extremely terrifying outcome. I can't rely on flame controlling to repeatedly divert the attention of those figures, Klein reminded himself. Then he turned to use his spirit body thread's vision that he didn't deactivate to size up the bread, stewed beef potatoes, and red wine on the dining table. He suspected that the food here was part of the magnet at the top of the cathedral. If it was consumed, one's spirit body threads would be corrupted, and it would cause them to be unable to resist floating towards the cathedral. This also explained why eating the food caused them to vanish. They ended up being hung up to dry in the cathedral and be let out to walk when the crimson moon turned clear. This matched Mr. A's description of the vanished people's reappearance under the bright moonlight. At a glance, Klein discovered that the food was like living beings. They had spirit body threads extending out, reaching towards the ancient cathedral. The most special point about them was that they had only one spirit body thread, obviously being different from the dense, countless spirit body threads of a normal living creature. Indeed, it's close to my theory. After obtaining some validation regarding his theory, Klein retracted his gaze and considered how to deal with Demoness of Despair Panatia. Beside him, Wraith Center in his ancient triangular hat and dark red robe appeared. This marionette's bones cracked as his face squirmed. Soon he turned into Jam and Sparrow. This was a marionette using the powers of a faceless. Klein observed his double for a moment and realized that there were some flaws. The clothes couldn't be changed, and if he concealed them with an illusion, it wasn't possible for him to fool a demigod-level Demoness of Despair. Even Mr. A might not fall for it. After some thought, he made Wraith Center take off his clothes. As for himself, he took off the black clergyman robe, and they switched clothes with one another. While wearing the clothes and hat, Klein's expression turned odd. Over the past 2 months, the marionette had been wearing the same outfit. It had been down the sewers and experienced an explosion, so there were all sorts of smells mixed into the clothes. It wasn't a pleasant smell. Sigh, my present suffering is all a result of my laziness prior to this. Klein sighed silently as he completed changing his appearance. He had turned into Jam and Sparrow dressed as a pirate captain. At this moment, Center had also changed into the black clergyman robe. His aura was spirited and no longer cold. He looked no different from a living person. Klein deliberated for a moment and took off Creeping Hunger, allowing Admiral of Blood to wear it on his left hand. This way, the marionette was the perfect copy of Jam and Sparrow. One must go all the way when putting on an act. Besides, if Creeping Hunger were to revolt at this moment, then it will be eating the marionette. Once the marionette lapses, will it feel cheated? It's like it ate a placebo, as Klein got Center to get used to his state and take away the fish meat. He seriously began formulating plans. Relying on a marionette that can use my Beyonder powers wouldn't be able to defeat a Demoness of Despair. Even stealing the obsidian rock from her is nearly impossible. She's a genuine demigod after all. Even though this extremely convincing marionette gives me a chance of achieving success in battle, such as letting it draw her attention while I complete a sudden sneak attack and constantly swap positions. Thus, confusing Panatia so that she can't make an accurate judgment. I can't make up for the disadvantage that stems from the difference in our levels and strength to achieve my goals. I can consider using the marionette to engage in close combat and attempt to control Panatia's spirit-body threads. He's already a corpse, so he wouldn't be affected by the plague. I can catch her by surprise using this method, but there are too many problems. First, the mysticism, viruses, and germs that a demoness of despair creates will grow in strength. At its peak, will it be able to affect a zombie? Second, does she still have other Beyonder powers I'm not aware of? There's a high chance that it's the case. I'll first make a list and write down my advantages or things that are on par with the demoness of despair. Let's see if I can get any ideas. I can disguise myself. A marionette using its Beyonder powers can be considered at the level of a demigod. Instantaneous swapping is also one. Apart from them, there isn't anything else. Yes, considering demoness of despair's current state, I seem to have something that I'm better at than her. She's in a half-crazed state. Her reason comes and goes at random and she does extreme things. She's easily led around by her instincts. Although she's still good at incitement and allurement, that's an innate quality for catching prey. As for me, I'm in a normal state, and I haven't had any problems with my rationality yet. I'm still able to think and analyze. Don't tell me I need to come out on top using my wit. An idea came to Klein as he gradually formulated a new train of thought and plans. Why must I fight demoness of despair Panatia to the death at this moment? She definitely yearns to escape this foggy town. Deep down in her heart, this will be something that beats her instinctive need to eat. Furthermore, she's still full at the moment. I can try to cooperate with her. She can provide that obsidian rock, and I'll draw the special and secret symbol, putting together the conditions for opening the door. Besides, I'm not too sure about Zaratal. Who knows what schemes he might be up to? He might be secretly plotting something. By pulling a demoness of despair into this, it can effectively make the situation chaotic and restrain him in some way. Cooperation is a diplomatic choice, not a militaristic choice. The effects of an intact stand-in at the demigod level will definitely be better than directly engaging in battle. This is equivalent to me obtaining benefits from both sides. Klein rapidly made a decision. As he pondered on the details of him negotiating to cooperate, he patiently waited for the crimson moon to return behind the fog. After a while, the crimson moonlight that seeped through the dark-colored curtains dimmed. Klein immediately made his marionette pass through the wall and leave where he was hiding. Then, Senner walked onto the streets with the appearance of Jam and Sparrow, walking straight towards the pitch-black cathedral. In about 10 seconds, Klein discovered that Senner was being affected by an ailment. To the dead, this was completely ineffective, but Klein could foresee that, with the passage of time, the ailment would worsen and turn stranger. It might even affect one's nerves and spirituality. This would make the zombie's actions turn stiff. In the end, even its knees would be unable to bend, making movement only being possible by hopping. Thankfully, I didn't choose to use the plan of letting my marionette control the spirit-body threads. Klein immediately made Senner say out loud, "I was inside the cathedral for a while and I'm not dead. I found a way to escape from this place." After saying that, Jam and Sparrow sniffed as though his resistance to the ailment had weakened due to the declining state of his body. And at this moment, the white-robed Panatia suddenly appeared at the door of the cathedral. Her hair had been tied up once again, looking neat and tidy. Her slightly crazy-looking but beautiful eyes looked at Jam and Sparrow as she took out a strangely profound obsidian rock. The contours of the obsidian rock was identical to the inset on the wall behind the cathedral's statue. "You need it?" Panatia asked calmly. Klein discovered that the demoness of despair had dispelled her plague and ailment as he hurriedly made Senner nod. "Yes." As long as you place it in the correct location in the cathedral and match it with a special symbol, we will be able to open a door that allows us to escape. I know that the cathedral's interior is very dangerous to you, but this is mainly a result of spirit-body threads. And as a marionettist, I can control spirit-body threads to prevent you from suffering the fate of being hung up. Panatia fell silent for a few seconds as she curled her lips. With a bright smile, she returned with a question. Then I'll become your marionette. Or you can stop helping me at the critical moment, making me turn into a loitering figure under the moon. Klein was long prepared. He immediately made his marionette reply earnestly. What should I do to make you feel at ease? Panatia didn't immediately reply. After some careful thought, she said, Give me your hair and flesh. Curses that demonesses are good at. Using Senner's hair and flesh to curse Jam and Sparrow. Count me as the loser if that works. As Klein felt grounded, he made the marionette appear in a difficult position. Then wouldn't you be able to kill me at any moment? Panatia replied with a smile. You can hand me the hair and flesh only when entering the cathedral. When inside, if there are any signs of me cursing you, you can give up controlling my spirit-body threads. It will be the same the other way round too. If anything abnormal happens to me, I'll immediately curse you. Once the door is opened, I'll leave first, and at the same time I'll return the flesh and hair to you. Jam and Sparrow hesitated for a long time as he discussed the details with the demoness of despair. Finally, he nodded and said, All right, let's do it. Just as Panatia wanted to say something, her eyes suddenly narrowed as she slowly said, For some reason, I'm still a little worried.